Hello, Internet students. Welcome to class with Professor Mead. Today we're going to talk about deviant behavior, but we're going to talk about one theory in particular. It's called strain theory. This is Robert Merton's functionalist theory of deviance, and it talks about how we become conforming members of society or deviant members of society. So essentially, according to Robert Merton, who you see depicted here, people are conformists, innovators, retreatists, ritualists, or rebels. So let's talk about how we become each. I think pair share for today. Can you define strain theory? How do traditional values produce deviance? And explain the following types of responses to strain: conformity, innovation, ritualism, retreatism, and rebellion. So Merton's strain theory falls under the umbrella of a functionalist theory on deviance. And essentially what strain theory asserts is that members of society, all of us, we learn to internalize traditional goals and the legitimate means for achieving those goals. So what does that mean? Focus on traditional goals and legitimate means. Traditional goals are the goals your society says are appropriate. In our society, that's, economic wealth, success, consumerism, buy a home, buy a nice car, have a family. Those are traditional goals. So our society teaches us actually that those are things that we should want. And when we learn and really truly believe that we want and need those things and those should be goals, we have internalized those goals. And then they teach us legitimate means for achieving those goals. And that is, if you want a big house and a nice car, you should go to college, get a good job, make a good living. And that's the appropriate way to go about achieving those goals in our society. What happens is, and what Merton asserted with strain theory, was that strain essentially is a form of anomie. So when people learn to internalize the traditional goals, which by the way, we're really, really good at getting people in our society to internalize those goals. Most of us as Americans want the nice house and the nice car and to be consumers and to have a good job and those kind of things. Those are the traditional goals. We have been taught that our whole life very passively, and we've internalized those. So since most of us internalize it, we can say our society is very good at teaching us that. What our society is not good at is offering everybody legitimate access to achieving those goals. So offering the majority of Americans, or even half of Americans, the access to be able to achieve those traditional goals through means that we consider to be appropriate. When this happens, when you internalize one but not the other, this causes strain, right? So when you want to have those traditional goals but you lack access to the legitimate means, you are strained, and strain, according to Merton, causes deviance. He also said not only does strain result in deviance, but conformity is still the most common thing. All of us are conformists. Myself including, you included, right? We are going to college, we go to work, we pay our bills, we live in a house, right? Even if we don't own it. All of these things make us conformists in our society, and we tend to almost all be conformists in general to those big ideals. So there are if you're not a conformist, there's 4 different ways in which you can end up being deviant from strain, that resulted from strain. And that's, you can be an innovative deviant, a ritualist deviant, a retreatist deviant, or a rebellious deviant, right? So a ritualist is let's start with one of the easier ones. An innovator is going to accept society's traditional goals, but reject the socially acceptable strategies. In other words, the legitimate means. So a good example of this is when you want the nice house and the nice car and all of these things, but you know you don't have access to them through a good paying job, or through those legitimate means, those ways in which society says it's okay. So you find another way. You might sell drugs to buy that nice car. You might steal the money, embezzle the money so that you can have the $1 million house, right? You might have white collar crime, so you embezzle maybe taxes, that kind of thing, or you're cheating on your taxes, that type of thing. Those are all what they call innovator deviance, and that's because you still accept all of those goals. You want all those traditional goals that society says you should have. You just you reject those traditional means. I'm not going to go to college to get the high-paying job. I'm going to forge a degree and turn that in to get the high-paying job. That's an innovator. A ritualist, on the other hand, is going to say, okay, I am going to reject society's traditional goals, but I'm going to accept the socially acceptable strategies. I'm still going to go to college probably. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to pay my bills. I'm going to do all of those things I'm supposed to do, but I don't want the big house and the white picket fence. I don't need to drive a fancy car, right? I'm going to accept the strategies. I'm going to try to be a good citizen. I'm going to pay my taxes, but I'm not going to accept all of these traditional things, being a consumerist, being, success being shaped only by wealth, value in thinness or leisure as a value in our society, right? So that would be a ritualist, somebody who still abides by the rules but rejects a lot of those traditional goals. People who are on YouTube as like minimalists today, they're a pretty good example of this because they're saying, okay, I don't need to have the overabundance of the middle class lifestyle. I'm going to reject that, but I'm not going to go outside of the traditionally acceptable ways to make a living. I'm just going to reject the other side of what society says I need to have. A retreatist rejects both. These are the people who are like, I'm done with society. I'm going to go live off of the land. I'm going to go live in the mountains. Not only do I not want the house and the fancy car and all that goes with it, but I also don't want your strategies. I don't want the 9-to-5 job. I don't feel like I need to go to work every day and pay bills. I'm going to reject that way of making a living, and I'm going to find something different. And I'm also going to reject all of society's traditional ways or traditional goals. And so that's the person who essentially, like a lot of people who move to Alaska could be considered retreatists because they are rejecting both society's traditional goals of what it means to be incorporated into American values and what you should achieve through success, but also the way you should go about it. They want to have success in a different way, so they reject both and they kind of pull back from society. So they're a retreatist. The rebel is the person who is probably the most innovative. They're going to reject and substitute both the traditional goals and the socially acceptable strategies. So for example, a lot of people who make really strong political change within our society could be seen as this. They would reject the goal of, self enrichment and substitute it with, say, enriching other people, making other people's lives better, that becoming their goal. And then they can reject, okay, the way that I go about helping people make a living wage or not to be put into dangerous situations when they're at work. Not only am I going to reject that I should be focused on myself in my lifetime, enriching it, but also rejecting okay, this is the only way I'm allowed to help other people. And you might actually use different types of strategies to help other people become more successful. And so we have a few examples of that. I'm going to switch to this one. The rebel wants to replace not just the traditional goal, but the socially acceptable strategy, right? So I'm going to break the system by not following the rules of the system. I give you a few examples here. War Dogs, the movie, right? They're a good example of innovators. They definitely desired the traditional goals, but instead of going to college and getting good jobs, they became war dogs. In other words, they sold guns and ammunition to other countries to become wealthy. Retreatists, Alaskan bush people, that was on TV for a while. They're a very good example of retreatists. And then one of my favorite movies, SLC Punk. He's kind of an example, sort of, because he, in the end, accepts the socially acceptable strategy. But they're a good example because they reject not only what society says is appropriate, but they replace it with something else that they say is appropriate. And then they go about becoming what they deem as successful in a different way. I like to think of the people who go on like Instagram and YouTube in the van life where you meet, they're like, oh yeah, I went to college and I have a law degree and now I'm living in my van and I'm a van lifer, right? This person is a ritualist, sort of, right? Because they're rejecting the traditional goal of buying a home, but they're still following the socially acceptable strategy by going to college and getting a prestigious degree. That's it. I hope you liked the little lecture on these and that it wasn't too repetitive. Other than that, I think that's it for today. So I guess I'll sign off as your reluctant YouTube professor. And as I've mentioned before, love being a professor, not so much about being a YouTuber.